Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Again, my name is Courtney Austin. I'm the marketing coordinator here at AIM. I'm going to go ahead and hand this on over to Anthony and Nick now, and they're going to go ahead and teach you all about navigating the underwriting process. Anthony, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our special presentation on how to navigate the underwriting process and avoid LTC declines. So today, Nick and I will be the pilots in the webinar to guide you along the way. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started and moving. All lines will be muted throughout the duration of the webinar. That means that's pretty much just to limit outside distractions primarily. As to that, we also ask if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the questions tab. If not, or even if you have any questions after the webinar, we will be doing our general follow-up outreaches, just as webinar reminders and follow-ups, just to see how you guys enjoyed the webinar, if you guys had any feedback, anything of this sort. So pretty much, without further ado, I'm going to be passing over to Nick, and we're going to get started.
Good morning, everybody. So step one to avoid declines is have an idea of your client's health. Asking your clients about their health history is huge. Now, at the time, it might seem a little awkward, a little embarrassing, for your clients to kind of divulge such information to you. But for the most part, they will understand that this is a needed step in getting coverage. You're a professional trying to help them out, right? This is the best care you can get. You're trying to help them get that process started. You don't have to have them spill their entire medical history to you right now necessarily, but definitely get an idea of where their health is. Later on down the underwriting process, they will need to be very specific about their medical history to an underwriter, but not right now, not to you. That comes later. Right now is a great time to have the underwriting guide on hand to kind of get an idea of their insurability, where they would rank. This will give you a great idea on how to proceed. Step two would have them fill out a pre-qual sheet. This is a simple one-page form for your clients to fill out with basic medical information to kind of get a better idea of where they are for their insurability, but also which rate they would be offered. Each carrier has a great rate system, usually with a preferred rating being the best, to class 1, class 2 for those less than in desirable health. Step 3, sending in that pre-qual sheet. Once your client has filled the sheet out with their information and all the hard to spell medications and all that good stuff, you as the agent can then send it in to us here at AIM, or in some instances directly to the carrier, which we will talk about later on. From there, on underwriting with whichever company you and your client are interested in, we'll evaluate the information given, then direct you which class the client will most likely be accepted for. Now note, whatever class the underwriter suggests you quote isn't a guarantee of coverage. That's very very important. And oftentimes when it comes to the phone interview down the line, your client might divulge information that changes that underwriting class. They're more likely to tell an underwriter on the phone stuff they wouldn't tell you necessarily to your face. So that might affect the class. Step 4, once you have a better idea of the class rating, that is when the fun begins. You start the app rating process, and off you go.
One thing I kind of wanted to touch on that Nick was talking about the pre-qual sheet, we actually have something we created. It's not carrier specific. It's just our LTC pre-qualification sheet. I'm going to kind of show you this really quick so you kind of see what I'm looking at. So this is kind of what it looks like. You have your name, date of birth, residence state, partner, because of course that's important, height, weight. A lot of times we kind of miss out on this key part, the height and weight. But bright side is once we fill out these pre-qual sheets, it kind of gives us a better idea. And then for you as well, it helps eliminate the possibility of a decline entirely for the most part, because, you send it to us, we send it directly to carriers, and then we go from there. But that's something I wanted to touch on. If you guys want this, you're more than welcome to ask us for it, and we'll get it right out to you. So pre-screening with our carriers, it's actually rather simple and more simpler than you would think. With Mutual of Omaha, of course, we have the pre-qual sheet that you can fill out for each one of these carriers, send it to us, and we'll get it out right away. But a lot of times, let's say you're meeting with a client or you want to just be able to take care of it yourself, you also have the availability to email Mutual of Omaha at ltcunderwriting@mutualofomaha.com. What's nice about them is they're actually rather rapid and get back to you at a reasonable time frame. I know myself, whenever I've emailed the underwriting for Mutual of Omaha, I traditionally get it within a 2-hour period, which is, rather unheard of for the fact of how busy they are and how they're normally got other things going on. They're rather quick. That's one thing I do like about Mutual. National Guardian Life, theirs is a little bit different. So they have an online form that you can fill out for a pre-qualification. And I'm actually going to open up this page so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. So this is what NGL has for their underwriting pre-qualification. And now, of course, as you can see, they even have on here the underwriting number you can call if you have any questions or any concerns. They're extremely helpful as well. Right here, you'll put in your information as the agent, and then you'll enter in pre-qualification. This is kind of similar to our LTC pre-qual sheet, but the pre-qual sheet is more dedicated, more or less, if like you wanted to send it to us, and we'll reach out to the carrier for you. But this takes care of, gender, height, weight, age, everything that you may think of question-wise. It's all listed right here. We do know it's a little bit tedious, of course, trying to get all this information out and questions resolved, but it takes care of a lot and a lot of stress off your shoulders. The bright side about this specific link as well, it'll take you directly to the underwriting pre-qual sheet, but you also have access to illustrations and getting supplies of the sort, so it helps. Thrivent, they're a little bit more exclusive to where they rather work directly with the upline. So this is where we'll go back to the pre-qual sheet. You'll fill out the pre-qual sheet, and then you'll shoot it back to us, or even if you don't have access to the pre-qual sheet or you don't want the pre-qual sheet, feel free to sum up what you know, everything you know about your client, send it to one of us here at AIM with what you got, and we'll get working on it, and we'll get out to Thrivent, and we'll work directly with Thrivent and make sure that case is smooth and we get the right answers. Important things to mention. So we have seen many times where agents misquote clients using like a standard preferred rating and, kind of moving away from the needle of where they normally are at. We've had many occasions where an agent will call in and require and request that they have a preferred rating, but they never pay attention to other factors like height, weight, and looking at the underwriting guide. This is kind of where I want to kind of show you what's important in cases similar to this. So right here is Mutual of Omaha's underwriting guide. Even them themselves, they have a criteria for preferred underwriting. This is huge. This is important. If you pay attention to this, you'll be able to see whether your client can actually qualify for preferred or if not. Because a lot of times people may miss these steps. For instance, your client could be completely healthy, not have a single issue, but they do tobacco. They had tobacco in the past 2 years. Let's say a year ago. Well, in the criteria for preferred underwriting, if your client it must have to be tobacco free for the past 2 years in order to even qualify. So there's quite a few different things that you want to pay attention to make sure that your client meets that qualification. And if not, even paying attention to, again, the underwriting class, because you have, height and weight builds where it has your maximums for preferred. And if, like, let's say, again, your client's 5'7", 186 pounds, and that's documented by doctor notes, they're going to fall into that select category because they're 1 pound over the preferred maximum. One thing about a lot of these carriers is height and weight. They're rather sticklers on that, and they're really non-negotiable when it comes to trying to figure out different ways to be able to avoid that. That's a key. It's always better to quote higher premiums than to come back to your client and surprise. This comes back to the whole sticker shock factor, right? So you want to be able to quote at that select. One thing we try coaching is apply it to select. Every time when you apply it to select, there is either, for the most part, if you're applying it to select and you went through the whole underwriting with your client, you got a pre-call sheet. Even if we're just quoting without having the information back from the underwriter yet, select is always a good start. Because if you go, let's say you're going, your client says they're healthy, they got no issues. Select is always still the best route to go, only for the fact of once they get that, let's say $120 premium a month, and then you come back to them and say, hey, we got approved at preferred, we're going to be charging 110 instead of 120. Your client can be extremely happy and extremely grateful that they're actually receiving what looks like a discount rather than the higher rate that they were looking at prior. In the flip side, instead of quoting at preferred and applying as preferred, and then your client's looking at, let's just say $200 premium monthly, and then it ends up drastically changing to $237 monthly. And then your client being really frustrated and irritated because that's not what they were expecting to pay. And then, of course, on a class 1, class 2 basis, we follow the steps and follow the guidelines, and we'll assess that as the time goes on. But again, quoting select is always the best way to stay out of issues and concerns on that end. Give your client the information on what to expect in the process. So this is a big key, right, on the next steps, letting them know what to expect on your LTC process. And one thing that Mutual of Omaha actually has and gives to their clients, not like the other carriers for the most part, but it still works for that same sense, is they have an next steps in the application process. Let me kind of briefly show you this. So this will show you what's next. Now that you applied for your LTC policy, you will need to be aware of the things that may be before you can be approved, the coverage, issue policy, blah, 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 right? So additional medical information, it'll kind of show you and briefly explain what your client's gonna be expecting. This is a nice handout to have and to be able to give to your client, because it kind of explains too, of course, telephone interview. If you are 64 or younger, odds are you're gonna get that telephone interview, right? It'll take approximately 30 to 45 minutes. You can give them that guideline so your client can properly prep. And once they schedule that telephone interview, they can actually schedule out an hour timeline so they have a good basis and trial and error time to make sure that they're set and good to go. Now, also as well, they do have a note. We will make every attempt to contact you within 2-hour window. So that's key to also pay attention to as well, because a lot of times, sometimes, that may not happen, and we'll have to go back to Mutual and figure out why it's not happening, but we'll take care of it for the most part. Face-to-face interview, of course, 65 or older. So that's really key to also pay attention to the difference between the face-to-face interviews as well as the telephone interviews. Those are huge to, note. But again, as stated, this gives the next steps of the application process. This is nice, and it also gives tips for a complete personal health interview. Now, if you'd like this, again, we're more than happy to get this out to you so you have this as well. Sometimes it's also nice to give to your clients as a, hey, this is what's coming, just so they're aware. Spam all 3 carriers. So what I'm trying to reference to spamming all 3 carriers is we want to make sure what we're looking at. So you give us, let's say we're referring back to that pre-qual sheet. You fill out the pre-qual sheet, you send it out to, let's just say you send it to me or Nick. What we're going to do here for you, we're going to send it to all 3 carriers to see what we get back. Because, for instance, you may get something from Mutual of Omaha saying your client is a class 1, and then you may get something from, NGL saying that your client is good to go and good to apply at their standard rate. Well, when you look at the rate system and the rate amount, you may be looking at, a $100 difference, $80 difference, $60 difference, whatever the case may be, because Mutual of Omaha may be more pricier now that they dropped it to class 1 on a specific category that they normally deem as a class 1 risk versus NGL, where they may not see that as class 1 risk. One thing to note about all these 3 carriers is their underwriting is key. Not all underwriting is the same for all the carriers, all 3 carriers. They always have certain different things that may work for one carrier and may not work for the other, or may work in a beneficial standard for the one other specific carrier. So that's reasons why we always spam all 3, just to make sure and get the best, the best case to understand what we're looking at and what we can get for that specific client to make your client happy.
All right, unusual declines and approvals, kind of like Anthony was just going on. Now this is when having the underwriting guide will come in handy. There are several medical conditions that you might not think would affect underwriting or coverage, but it's pretty surprising, at least to me, some of the things that the companies consider before offering coverage. On the other side of the coin, however, might be good news. There might be certain medical conditions where you might just assume would be an automatic decline, something like cancer, a history of stroke, things of that nature. It might surprise you to learn that this isn't always the case, and it wouldn't necessarily be a decline. In some instances, the clients who currently have these conditions would still be insurable. So it's really key to have the underwriting guide on hand, just to kind of thumb through it, see what's a decline, what's a case-by-case insurability type thing. The point is, knowing the underwriting guide and having it available to you and your client is hugely beneficial. How to avoid declines. We spoke about the underwriting guides and the importance of knowing medical conditions your clients may have. Why is that important? Why do you have to take these steps that might feel at times tedious and unnecessary, long, drawn out? Because you are, of course, trying to avoid declines. Making sure your clients are upfront about their medical conditions plays into this, as does quoting the right rate class, as Anthony was speaking about earlier. How to do this? Similar to what we talked about earlier, if you quote a preferred rating, and after the phone interview comes through, further down the line, your client gets a lesser rating than preferred, say standard class 1. Now you have to go back to your client, you have to be the bearer of bad news and tell them that the premiums you had in mind are no longer the case, and now they have to pay a higher premium. This isn't necessarily a decline from the company because they still insure them, but your client's going to be upset. Like Anthony had mentioned, they might just completely back out of the deal. Your client will decline you, basically. Another way to avoid declines is looking at multiple carriers, like Anthony was mentioning. You don't necessarily have to do that, but we can on our side of things. And then also, multiple carriers, they have different strengths, different things they play into. So just, you might be set up and really prefer one carrier, but as we will soon find out, different companies will have different criteria they take into account when offering coverage. You might send in your client's information to company A and get a do not submit, we will not offer coverage at this time email, but you send in the same information to company B and they will offer that coverage. This is another big reason to submit and send in those pre-qual sheets. A we will not offer coverage, do not submit response is extremely different than a decline of coverage notice. An outright decline of coverage is not only frustrating for you and your client now in the short term, it is also extremely detrimental in the long run. If your client gets declined by company A, it is very likely that company B, C, and D will also deny coverage. One of the first questions on any LTC app is, have you been declined coverage in the past? And if your client has, that is a very big red mark against them. It's just not worth the risk.
Yeah, so what Nick was saying as well, when it comes to, on the application, when it asks if you've been declined for another carrier, One thing to note, of course, that's huge, right? It's a big knock, and a lot of carriers won't accept your client if they've been declined for a specific reason. But this is where it comes into play as well. Let's say this did happen, and your said client ended up going with another agent prior who they ended up getting declined with for some specific reason. Let's just say the application wasn't filled out correctly or whatever the case was. Now, the best way to be able to address that is there's still a 10% chance we can possibly get that through, because every application that was sent in, even if it was a decline, now for you assess that, get that information, figure out why they were declined, and then bring it to us, and we'll see what we can do. We'll reach out to, for instance, Mutual of Omaha, and talk to the manager, the underwriting manager, to see if there's any wiggle room or anything we can do about this case, or what guidance we can get to be able to move forward. So that's huge. That's a good point Nick made. Now, in the underwriting field guide, this actually comes directly out of their underwriting guide for Mutual of Omaha. They look at the big picture, the total picture, and they evaluate everything when it comes to health history, cognitive status, daily living activities, ability to perform your instrumental activities of daily living. These play big parts, right? So in order, just an idea on why these do, in order to go on claim with long-term care, you have to not be able to perform 2 of the ADLs, which is the eating, toileting, transferring, bathing, dressing, continence. So any 2 of those will automatically put you on claim. Reason why, if you're unable to perform any of these, that becomes a big issue when it comes to underwriting and the carriers assessing the risk and taking that client on. Now, instrumental activities of daily living is a huge part as well. So if you're unable to perform any of these, whether shopping, housework, which these of course are very tedious, but those also play a huge part into those affecting and possibly affecting down the road your ADLs or how your risk is assessed. So everything comes into risk. Mutual of Omaha assesses the risk. That's where underwriting comes into play, and they determine based off of many different factors, but these are just huge factors to pay attention to. Confirm your client fits the bill chart. So kind of just, I wanted to touch back on this again. This is similar to what I was showing you for the Mutual of Omaha build sheet on their underwriting guide, right? There is a guide. There is a guide that's set out there. Shows you what the height, weight is for each category. It shows what the minimum is as well. There have been cases where Mutual of Omaha has declined clients because they did not meet the minimum weight. So do not forget that there is a minimum weight. But you also have the list for each of these maximums. This means if your client exceeds any of these maximums, they cannot qualify for preferred select class 1 rating. Now, of course, you may be asking, well, there's a class 2 rating for Mutual of Omaha, right? Well, with height and weight, it's based off of this class 1 rating. So if your client is, let's say, right here, 5'9", and if he is 275, he will be declined by Mutual of Omaha. There's no class 2 maximum. It's only a class 1 maximum. That's the way they assess, and that's the way they rate that. Ensure your clients have been seen by a physician in the past 2 years. This is a huge, huge thing. We've been dealing with this a lot here in Washington, where we've had this Washington Trust, where a lot of times we've seen a lot of applications come in and get pushed back by Mutual and not even looked at because they have not seen a physician in the past 2 years. Now, that doesn't specifically mean that they need to have blood work every 2 years, but they need to have a basic assessment within the past 2 years. And that needs to be documented, of course, which in this case, it would be. But that is key to make sure your client has seen a physician in the past 2 years, or carriers like Mutual will not even look at it. Prepare your clients for the health interview. Now, this is another one where I was kind of explaining and showing another sheet that kind of came into play, which is your LTC next steps. This goes over the telephone interview. This gives a brief explanation on what's going to happen and what to expect. It's pretty imperative that you kind of give them the basic guidelines and understanding of what's going to come, how it's going to come, and which way it's going to come, because those are the biggest keys to be able to set them up for success so they're not blindsided, essentially. Now, ask about prior declines. It's kind of what we were just touching on previous about if your client was declined. The biggest thing, we still have the pre-screening at LTC, Underwriting, mutualofomaha.com. I highly recommend, if your client did have a previous decline, reach out to us first before even sending the email to the Underwriting at Mutual of Omaha, because we'll be able to touch base with that for you, and we'll try to see if we can work any magic on that case. Insured medications are not on the insurable list. Now, a lot of times we don't realize that there are uninsurable medications as well as uninsurable conditions that are listed. Biggest key on the Mutual of Omaha Underwriting Guide. We're going to touch base back on this. Uninsurable medications. It has every list of every single medication that they deem as uninsurable. So if your clients are taking any of this, odds are they're going to be declined, without a doubt. Per the exception of if you're looking at the Underwriting Guide, and let's say you have one where it has an asterisk. The asterisk means it's going to be an underwriter discretion. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a knockout, but you could possibly get away with it. It's one of those things where we want to be able to make sure there's quite a few different medications. A lot of the reason for it being a unsure is for the mere fact that those specific medications don't all necessarily mean that they're for the specific condition. There's certain conditions that if you're taking that medication will automatically be a knockout. So that's the biggest reason why. But as to that, kind of similar to that basis, there's also uninsurable conditions, things to keep in mind as well. Uninsurable conditions are listed in the Underwriting Guide to also pay attention to. A lot of these will have the same exact thing, where there will be a couple with asterisks, and those are underwriter consideration as well. But for the most part, most all the time, at least 99%, if they have one of these conditions, it's going to be a decline. And then, of course, kind of jumped a little bit ahead earlier, but if on the medication, provide the medication type, diagnosis, and how long they've been taking the medication. Again, big reason for that being is if that medication was on the uninsurable list, but even had an asterisk, or even if, like, let's say they took it 3 years, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and they're off of it. Biggest thing is to list that, send it over to us, and we'll get right on it to figure out whether we can even apply, because we might be able to apply, but it's also key to make sure that, we're touching the right steps on that specific case.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at National Guardian Life and what to expect with this great carrier. This slide is kind of going over where you can find their own pre-qual sheet and what to expect from it. Also, we're more than happy, like we've been talking about, to provide any pre-screening materials from any company you might need from any of these carriers. With NGL, you should anticipate the underwriting process to take, on average, around 30 days or so. NGL will obtain medical records in virtually every case. For applicants aged near 65 and under, telephone interviews are performed to evaluate the applicant's medical history and to ascertain the applicant's ability to live and function independently. Kind of like, the prior company, it's all going over the same stuff. For those aged 66 and over, a face-to-face assessment and exam is automatically required from NGL. Lab tests for urine and blood are ordered only if the applicant's current condition must be established due to significant past medical history. A prescription drug check, which obtains information on prescribed medications from a pharmacy database, is also ordered for each applicant. All functional assessments, exams, and lab tests are ordered only by NGL's underwriting department.
Thrive-In. One thing to keep in mind about Thrive-In, a lot of times we always get asked here, do we have anything for the younger market? Believe it or not, we do. 18, as you can see, underwriting requirement, it goes all the way down to 18. A lot of times what plays big key into Thrive-In is, I'm sure many of you have saw what was going on here in Washington. Here in Washington, we had what was called the Washington State CARES Fund Act, where every single person who is a W-2 employee, 18 and over, was going to be taxed part of their wages, individual wages, to go into a fund that truly wasn't even a good fund by any means, but it was to give them basic LTC coverage. So long story short, this tax that was going to be taken in place ended up affecting everyone who was 18 and over. And the only way to get out of that tax was if you had a private LTC policy. Now, this is where a lot of Thrive-In's business came from, at least from us over the past year, was a tremendous amount of people who were under the age of 30. Because if you're aware, Mutual of Omaha's minimum was 30, and so were other carriers. So Thrive-In really fit that bill, and you've seen a lot of applications from those who are within the 20 ranges, even in their higher 20s, even some who are 18, believe it or not, that were submitting a tremendous amount of applications. One thing to keep in mind is that actual tax that went through in Washington, many other states are actually looking on the outside in, and some are even working on stuff to come into play in the year 2023, possibly even in a couple years after that. So that's something that we've been monitoring, of course, and paying some attention to. But it brings to the point that now people who are 18 and over are looking at LTC as a possibility. And of course, the rates itself are extremely inexpensive when you're looking at something of a younger age, of course. But things to keep in mind, again, preferred underwriting checklist, kind of similar to what we were looking at with Mutual of Omaha, where in the guideline, it actually had what their minimums are, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And even on Thrive-In's website, they do have multiple stuff on their uninsured. So here, let me bring it over really quick. So on Thrive-In's underwriting guide, they have preferred underwriting checklists. So this is what I was referring to. No tobacco over the past 2 years, physical exam over the past 24 months. So this is kind of similar. Remember how I was referring to with Mutual of Omaha, how you had to have seen a physician over the past 24 months. It isn't necessarily the case with Thrive-In in certain circumstances. But again, it's listed. That's how you get preferred. If you haven't within the past 24 months, you're not going to get preferred regardless. Even if you have it scheduled there, they won't look at that. But again, thing to keep in mind, Thrive-In's underwriting guide is almost similar to Mutual, where they have, their underwriting guide checklist as well as uninsurable conditions that play a big factor. And then, of course, red flag medications. It'll show all the medications that will bring up a red flag to the underwriter that they would need to review and look at. Pretty simple, pretty important, but a lot of that is things that we want to be able to monitor to make sure that we do not have a decline. Plan B alternatives. So a lot of times you have those declines, right? That with Mutual of Omaha, with Thrive-In's, with NGL, your client couldn't get through. They're not going to qualify for LTC. It's kind of almost impossible for them to qualify. They have this, they have that. Or even let's look at the other factor, price. If let's just say they're outpriced, they cannot qualify for this specific product, or they don't want to pay that much money. Big thing to realize is we always do have alternatives. We have more alternatives than the two I'm showing, but these are our more popular alternatives. These are the biggest keys. Now, of course, pay attention. A lot of these, it's all state dependent, right? So a short-term home health care product, you're not going to see that in Washington, California, and other states for that matter. But the thing is to pay attention to. Doesn't hurt to ask if it's available. We'll let you know whether it's available in your state. But you're looking at, for instance, a policy like GTL's critical cash. What's nice is, let's say your client gets one of these conditions. They get diagnosed with one of these conditions. What's nice about this product is you can receive a monthly benefit and a facility benefit. Your monthly base benefit, you can either receive in a lump sum amount depending on the benefit you choose. So let's say you choose, here, let's use this example. This example will probably be pretty helpful. Let's say you have $2,000 base benefit for 24 months. What that means is you'll either receive a lump sum benefit of $48,000 or $2,000 for 24 months. Now, the combination between your base benefit and your facility benefit can't exceed $6,000. So let's say you have a $2,000 base benefit, what we were just looking at, and then let's say you do another $2,000 for your facility benefit, which means so for that 24 months, you receive that $2,000 for 24 months or lump sum, but you also receive that monthly facility benefit, let's say nursing home, $2,000 for 24 months. It's a huge beneficial benefit. There's very minimal underwriting. It's not that expensive. It still is decently priced. It's not bad by any means. But again, it's always an option if your client can't qualify. Short-term home health care. Short-term home health care is very selected. It's not necessarily available in every state, but for the most states that it is approved in, it's a huge beneficial product. So if you still are working in Oregon, Idaho, even around the states or surrounding states around the state that isn't technically approved in, it's still a huge product. It's almost an easy sell, and quite frankly, it could be a guaranteed issue product as well. They only ask maybe 3 or 4 health questions, and I know one of them is like cognitive impairment, or if you have a major surgery coming up. It's really easy to qualify for this product, and it's extremely inexpensive. But when you're looking at a 400 plan, this is all daily benefit. You're receiving $450 out of this daily benefit, but you also, one thing that makes this huge is you even have a prescription drug benefit that's built into this plan. That doesn't take away from that $450 daily benefit. This is additional benefit where you can receive up to $600 in benefits, which is huge again. Now, restoration of benefits, this again is specific per state. So even if this product is available in your state, make sure this is available for it. But you have restoration of benefits, where if, like, let's say benefits are restored after coverage, home health care services have not been received for a consecutive of 180 days, and a licensed practitioner has certified that you have sufficiently recovered, no longer need just legal bargaining. But for the most part, those are a couple popular plan alternatives that play a huge key. So if you do have any concerns or questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be able to help you with these products. But these are 2 huge popular products that just because your client is declined, don't feel discouraged, because we do have other options that may be able to fit your client's needs. Now, again, of course, one thing we kind of didn't really touch on, but, declines will happen regardless of the case. It will happen even if we don't want it to happen. A lot of times we can touch bases on every part that we can. Underwriter may miss something when we're sending in a pre-qual, and unfortunately it happens time to time. Nobody's perfect, but again, these are just tips and tools to be able to help you make it smoother and be able to move the process along. Again, kind of similar to what I was saying before, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, ask for it if you don't have it. LTC pre-qual sheet, We'll be able to send this out to you immediately, as well as the next steps to let your clients know what's going on and what can come around the corner. So with that being said, thank you all for joining our webinar today. We will be reaching out to you guys, momentarily, not too sure when, but we'll be reaching out to you guys today to talk about the webinar, see how you guys like this, see if you guys have any questions or even any advice. We love taking advice to hear about what we can do to help better ourselves for the next webinar. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.